In prevention, we are all leaders. Whether you're leading a nationwide prevention initiative, facilitating statewide prevention community, you're a coalition coordinator, or a one-person shop, you are a prevention leader. How we show up and how we engage with others to create positive change takes all types of leadership. So sit back and enjoy these conversations with your fellow prevention leaders from across the globe who are sharing their lessons learned, best practices, and strategies for success. Welcome to the Prevention Leaders Podcast. I'm your host, Dave Clausen. So honored to have you with us today. For today's episode, we're traveling across the globe to Bali to talk sober coaching, meditation, mindfulness, and yoga. You may know my guest by her Instagram name, Sober Yoga Girl, a former party girl turned international yoga teacher and sober lifestyle coach. Originally from Canada, Alex has been living overseas throughout her 20s. Now, she left the partying scene in 2019 and now helps others do the same using meditation, mindfulness, yoga tools, and coaching. Alex has since moved to Bali, Indonesia, where she runs her business full-time, the Mindful Life Practice, and she also hosts the Sober Yoga Girl podcast. A lot of fun stuff to talk about in this episode, but without further ado, Alex, welcome to the show.
Thank you so much for having me. I'm so happy to be here.
Yes, I am honored to have you. Looking forward to this conversation since we first connected on Instagram. Yes, listeners, we just connected on Instagram, and here we are today. Social media can be used for good. Some of my listeners might not be familiar with your story, your background, and why in the heck is Dave interviewing somebody from Bali? Would you mind opening up, sharing a little bit kind of about your background and sort of what led you to Bali?
Yeah, absolutely. So I am originally from Toronto, Canada, and I grew up in a very normal Canadian, North American upbringing in the sense that I grew up in the city. And for me, exposure to alcohol and alcohol use in, my friends and my family was like a normal part of my upbringing. It was a normal thing. And so I was a pretty big party girl from age 15 onwards. I got into drinking because I just thought it was the cool thing to do. It was what all my friends were doing, and went off to university and was just the normal party girl with everyone. And when I was 23, I was finishing up school in Canada. And the interesting thing for school for teachers, so I was in school to be a teacher. And in Canada, at the time I was graduating, it was actually quite competitive to get a teaching job in Canada. So my professors were encouraging us to go overseas. And there's a big network overseas of international schools where you can go live abroad. You kind of get taken care of, nurtured by this school, provided with housing, and you have a pretty amazing international experience. And so I was around 23 at this point, and I had already become a yoga teacher. I really wanted to teach yoga full time. My parents and everyone just wanted me to become a teacher. And I was like, okay, well, I don't really want to be a substitute teacher for the next 5 years. So I'm just going to go overseas. And to everyone's delight, I decided to move to the Middle East, which I think terrified everyone because they're like, of all the places in the world, like you've chosen the Middle East. And so I moved to Kuwait. And Kuwait is a really interesting location for me to end up at that age, because Kuwait is one of 12 countries in the world where alcohol is illegal. So alcohol was completely illegal, and it's this tiny little country the size of Toronto. And I got really into the whole underground party scene there. And I also developed what I see now as problematic mindset around alcohol. At the time, I didn't recognize it as such, but when you're living in a country where alcohol is illegal and you have this, I already was having this issue with alcohol, I just became obsessed and addicted to traveling on the weekend, going to Dubai and Abu Dhabi where I could party, learning how to make alcohol, trying to find people in Kuwait who can give me access to alcohol. And it just became this really obsessive mentality around alcohol. And so I ended up moving to Abu Dhabi when I was 25. So I loved the Middle East. I loved living overseas. Kuwait itself was not the country for me. So I ended up moving to Abu Dhabi and getting really into the partying there and the nightlife and everything. And it ended up being not long after I moved to Dubai. It's so funny because I had said, my life will be so much happier if I'm living in a country where I can drink. And as soon as I got to a country where I could drink, it just got like 1,000 times worse. And so I ended up getting sober when I was 27. And I do think all of these extreme environments kind of prompted me into becoming alcohol free at a pretty young age, because I was in these really big extremes. And now, so once I quit drinking, it kind of set me on this snowball in motion, which I'm sure we'll talk more about, when I started building my business and building my community, and ended up kind of packing up everything and now coming to Bali. And so this is where I live now.
Wonderful. Yes. Incredible journey thus far and still in progress. Tip of the iceberg. More big things to come from you, I know. And we'll get into those a little bit. Can you tell me a little bit more? So, sidetrack, culture is a big thing to me, the impacts of culture, not just ethnic, but organizational, community, university, culture, the perceived norms, all of that can play an impact into making choices around substances. I know the college environment from my own personal story, and being a combat veteran, the culture that comes from military culture, not asking for help, not wanting to show weakness. And those all played into my drinking. So let's unpack a little more. I'm curious, how do you see those cultures that you lived in, those environments? What did that look like when it came to drinking?
Yeah, that's a really good question, because I was in such extremes. So in my university culture, I think it was very normalized to be drinking every night of the week, partying every night of the week. We were really young, though. We were in our 20s. So I don't think I thought that there was anything different about the way I was consuming, because it seemed like that's what all of my friends were doing. When I moved to Kuwait, the culture was really interesting because it was just such a unique place to be, because alcohol was illegal. And so it wasn't spoken about publicly, but it was like a very hush thing. And it became, for Westerners like me, who were people who like to drink, it became this obsessive thing of like, how can we find it? Where can we find it? But it wasn't as extreme as when I moved to Dubai. And that was the most interesting thing for me. It's like, Dubai is such a glamorous, glitzy, people go there to party in the region. And that was where it really came to its head, because this is where it was normal for people to be drunk at like noon on a Friday. So our weekend was Friday, Saturday, and this was the social thing people do in Dubai. It's like these bottomless brunches where they start drinking at noon on a Friday. And every night of the week in Dubai, women could drink for free at different bars, like completely for free, no cost, because basically the historical culture was that so many of the expats coming overseas in Dubai were men, and they were trying to get women in the bars. So they had these ladies' nights every night of the week. But if you're someone like me, I could tell you the deals, the ladies' nights in every bar across the city. I could tell you what drinks you could get. I could tell you what night it was. Like, I still remember some of these deals, however many years later. I'm almost 3 years sober. But that was like one of the most extreme things I'd ever been in, because that was even more extreme than in university, which was like a party culture. In Dubai, it was like you were 24/7 on vacation. And that was where it massively came to a head, which I think is the irony, because I had literally chosen to live in that place because I was like, oh, my life's going to be so happy when I can drink. And that was where it just crashed and burned. I mean, in the best way possible, because here I am now, 3 years sober, but at the time it didn't seem like the best thing.
That line that you said, I think is powerful for folks to hear about. Thought your life would be the happiest when you lived in a place that you could drink. And in fact, it was the opposite. Tell me more about that, the happiness component of that.
So I believe that all of us have all of these narratives in our mind that shape our perception and they shape our reality. And you face it when you're talking to people in initial sobriety and they, don't know what they're going to do without a glass of wine in their hand, or they don't know what they're going to do without a beer, or they don't know what words they're going to say to someone about why they're not drinking. And all of these things are kind of like a narrative that have been constructed for us from society, from our culture, from our personal experience. And so I had this narrative running in my head the entire time I lived in Kuwait that, because as I was there progressively, my drinking got worse and worse and worse because of my whole mentality of like, my life will be so much happier when I'm out of the country and able to drink. Like, this was always my mindset. And I remember in my second year in Kuwait, so I was there for a total of 2 years, and I had a partner, like I was in a very serious relationship with someone who we both had this obsessive mentality, and we were always like grumpy and pissed off when we had to stay in Kuwait for the weekend because but we were always like, we can't drink. But the thing is, like, we were drinking, we were just drinking like our homemade wine or like our like bootleg alcohol. So it's like, it's not like we were still drinking. We were just mad that we couldn't have like a real beer with like cold and foam on it, and that whole thing is just made up. That whole thing. Like, I think if I went back to Kuwait, like, I probably would not choose to go back there because there were other things about it that were not right for me. But I do think if I went there as a sober person, I would have a completely different experience because I wouldn't be mad all the time. Like, every time I had to catch a flight back into Kuwait, I was like pissed off that I was going back there. Yeah. And it's like, this is shaping my experience. And now that I understand that with mindfulness and I can like observe all my thoughts with detachment, I realize that I'm creating that entire negative experience by the thoughts in my head, right? It's not actually. And this whole flight to Kuwait is not a negative thing. It's the story that I've constructed for myself around it. And so I think I had this whole story that my life would be happier in Dubai. And for a while it was. For a while it was amazing. And then you're getting drunk every single night of the week. And then you're hungover every day. And then it was at the point where I had to get sober because it just nosedived so quickly. And I think I've seen it advertised, or I've seen it said before, that everything that alcohol tells you is true is actually the opposite. So alcohol says it makes you happier, it actually makes you more depressed. Alcohol says it makes you more social, it actually makes you less social. And it's all these things that I believed to be true about alcohol. And then when I actually had it, it just got, worse and worse.
So you reminded me of a quote from a friend and colleague, Jeff Linkenbach from the Montana Institute, where they teach the science of the positive and positive community norms. And get ready. I love this quote. If perception is reality, so too is misperception. Oftentimes we have a misperception about the norms, the ways of being, and that, just like you were saying, that thinking, that line of thinking becomes our reality.
Yeah, it's so interesting.
Right. It's just one I'd like to just sit with and reflect on and think about what misperceptions have I had that I brought into and made my reality. Mm-hmm.
Yeah.
So tell me about your folks, we're getting personal here. Tell me about your breakup in 2019. The breakup with booze.
Oh, the breakup with booze. I was like, which ex is he talking about?
Gotcha.
That's so funny. I was like, I don't think I broke up with a boyfriend in 2019. Yes, I broke up with alcohol. Yeah, so I'm actually coming up on 3 years sober in April, which is amazing.
Ooh.
I never, ever thought I would get to this point. I mean, I never thought that I was getting sober when I stopped drinking. That was not what I thought was going on. So I hit a point where I was Googling at night how to quit drinking. And I started seeing ads on Facebook for a sober challenge. And it was a challenge. It was called 1 Year No Beer. I don't know if you've heard of that community online. Have you seen that community?
I've seen it. Yes.
Yeah.
Yeah.
So what I felt that they did really well was they made, it was like what we were talking about earlier before we started recording the episode of just making being alcohol free seeming cool, making it seem positive, making it seem like an awesome thing. And for myself, I couldn't identify with this idea of being an alcoholic or labeling myself or the losses I was getting from all of that. Also, it just wasn't super accessible in the Middle East. You know, the Middle East is a little bit behind in terms of this whole concept of like talking about mental health, talking about alcohol use, substance use. Like it's not, they are making big legal reforms and it is coming more and more to the forefront, but definitely, 5 years ago, it wasn't really a big thing there. So I started seeing this community online and kind of put this seed in my head. And I always think about that. It's like we were saying, social media can be used for positive things. I think if I wasn't on Facebook and hadn't seen all these ads, I don't know if I would have found sobriety at that point in my life because it really was the inspiration for me. But all of this was so stigmatized and all of it was something that I was so afraid about that I actually couldn't even like the page, couldn't even follow them because I was like so concerned that other people would see this and think I had a drinking problem, which just seems so ridiculous in hindsight. And I always think about that when I mention 1 Year No Beer, there's like so many people that have never heard of it. And I always assumed that like everyone knew exactly what it was, but it's because I was having this alcohol issue that I was getting this content targeted at me, which is how I knew about it. And so it just shows again, our perception of what, our perception is like one perception and it's not like everyone's reality.
So let me summarize, see if I heard things right. You were Googling, and then because you were Googling, you saw targeted Facebook ads that then helped start you on your sober journey.
Yeah. I mean, I don't think I knew that was what was happening at the time. Like I'm aware of it now that that's how it works because that's why I was getting all this stuff. But yeah, all of my social media would be ads for sobriety, which is like the wildest thing. And so I was seeing it over like a 4-month period or 5-month period. I honestly don't even remember when I started seeing it because I don't remember Googling. I think I would be Googling like how to quit drinking or whatever it was. But this seed was planted in my head. But for me, there were so many things happening at this point in my life. So this was around 2018, like end of 2018, beginning of 2019. And at that point, I had planned this backpacking trip around Southeast Asia for Christmas. And then I was going with a bunch of friends to Norway. And then one of my best childhood friends was coming over from Canada because it was the Special Olympics. And then me and my mom were going to Morocco. Like I had this like jam, like it's probably the busiest time of my life in terms of like stuff going on.
Makes me tired thinking about it. That's a lot of travel. Yeah.
Yeah. And so I was like, and it seems like a lot now after COVID when like, we haven't left one place for like years.
Right.
So I had thought, I can't quit because of this, that, and the other thing. I have too many things going on, blah, 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 which everyone kind of has this period coming up to their sobriety where they are surrendering, letting go, still holding on, have their reasons. And it was when I went on this trip with my mom. So my mom and I were backpacking around Morocco. And that was when I really remember maybe it was because it was right before I got sober that I like analyzed lots of moments on that trip. But I really remember my whole happiness being shaped by access to alcohol. And again, it's like a country in the Middle East where alcohol is controlled and there's lots of places where you can't have it and there's different villages where you can't. And so there were lots of times where I would end up at a restaurant where alcohol wasn't accessible, or we were in a village where it wasn't accessible, and I was like obsessed with finding restaurants where we could drink, like asking our tour guide to take us to places with alcohol, and then bringing wine in my backpack. And just a lot of my happiness was shaped around drinking. And there's one night that I remember in particular. I talked about it on a lot of podcasts, but it was my birthday. So we were in Morocco on my birthday, and we were staying at this homestay on the top of the High Atlas Mountains. And
Cool.
Something had happened a couple months ago where it was actually a really similar experience. I was staying at a homestay on the Lao Mekong River, taking a boat from Laos to Thailand, and it was New Year's Eve. And on both scenarios, it was like a special occasion where I was like, this entire thing is ruined because I can't drink, which in hindsight just seems like the most ridiculous thing, right? Because I was in a once in a lifetime experience, which should have been incredible. And I was there being like, this sucks because I can't drink. And in the end, we brought a bottle of wine. I hiked up the mountain with wine. I remember saying to my mom, like, don't give anyone this wine because it's my birthday. And, it wasn't enough to get drunk. And I was pissed off about that. And then I remember going to bed that night and thinking like, I really, really need to quit drinking. And so I had about 4 more nights in Morocco. So I went out with a bang. I'm pretty sure I brought the whole group, convinced them all to go to the bar until like 2 a.m. one night. I was always that person of like getting everyone to do like the craziest things. Mm-hmm. And we all just got so drunk on the last night. And it's funny because they were all like my mom's age. I was like this 20-year-old kid that was like just bringing the party. But at the end of that vacation, I was on a flight home from Casablanca to Abu Dhabi. My mom flew to Canada. I flew to from Abu Dhabi. And on the plane, I was just like, okay, this is it. This is day one. And the intention was never for me to quit forever. The intention was actually, I'm going to do this 28-day, 1 year no beer challenge. Cause like 1 year was way too dramatic. 90 days was way too traumatic. I was like, okay, I'm just going to do 1 month. And it was shortly after that. I actually didn't even sign up for their program because I can't remember what my reasons were. If I was like, this is too expensive, or like, I don't know why, I don't want to be part of the group, like whatever my thing was. By like day 7, I was like, okay, I need to join. Like I cannot do this by myself. So I remember joining retroactively, and joining was like the best thing for me ever because of the Facebook group, which I finally joined. I was like so stigmatized by it that I was like, I can't even be in this group. Like people are going to see I'm in it. No. Even though it was a private group, like I seriously thought people would see me joining the group, which just seems so ridiculous because the group was called OYNB. Again, it was like in code. Like if someone saw Alex joined OY, they'll be like, oh, Alex is like, sounds like a gynecology group, like, and then they just like keep scrolling. Like it's not even like, this is a sober group, right? And I was just so afraid about what people would think about me. And joining that group was like the number one game changer because all of a sudden I had community.
Yes, community. One of my taglines is prevention is better together, and together we are stronger. Really just focused on building the community to build the capacity of our communities. I mean, just together is better. Yes. So many different places I want to take this conversation. I've got squirrel brain right now. So you're on the plane, you made that choice, you get home, you have the courage to join the Facebook group, and that community really helped you as you're getting started on your sober journey. What were some other things that helped you?
So I remember in the first week, it was It was so hard. Just the cravings, the emotions. I was really struggling with my mental health. And to be, I was kind of on this like, this really intense up and down as my mood just kind of like recalibrated. And I remember when I was really struggling with my cravings, I was spending a lot of time at the gym. I was spending all night like doing yoga, doing back-to-back classes, just like keeping myself as busy as possible. I did a lot of writing. What else did I do? I played a lot of guitar. I sang a lot. Yeah. At that point, I was not yet. It was around day 30 that I got started on the business building thing. Before that, I was just kind of focused on my own healing. And then as soon as I had the business, it's like, I've heard it said, find your why, you'll find your way. I actually thought I made that up. And then I just found out this week it's like a book title. But that's it. It's like once you have your motivation or your inspiration or like the thing that's going to help you keep going, then you're good. But it's like finding that thing. And for me, it was building the mindful life practice, which is what I do now.
You may have seen me. So our listeners, we're not recording video, but y'all, I just beamed a big old smile when Alex started talking about why. That is something that has been very powerful for me once I tapped into and really found my why. So much that it is actually my computer wallpaper on my backdrop. So I get to see it every day and use it as my life compass. If I have to make a big decision, how does this align or fit into me living out my why? And just for fun, for my own personal fun, my why is to live and share a life of continued growth so that we may overcome adversity and live a fulfilling life. Because we're all going to face adversity. And that live and share, I've got to keep on living, live by example, to lead by example, to let others know that they're not alone and that they can make it through as well. Yes, find your why, y'all. Absolutely. Okay. End soapbox. Before we hit record, we talked a little bit about Sober Curious. I kind of shared how a lot of the US based colleges and universities might be a good fit to bring that messaging, that movement to. Can you kind of tell us a little bit more about what that is and how you see its impact?
Yeah, absolutely. So I'll tell you a bit about the story about how we became Sober Curious Yoga. First of all, the term curious, I definitely didn't coin that. I think it was Ruby Warrington. I think there's a book called Sober Curious. But originally, my program was called Sober Girls Yoga. And that was what we originally did. And we were doing these 30-day Sober Girls Yoga challenges. And that was amazing. You know, it was the start of what we did, but there were a couple reasons why I decided to change it to Sober Curious Yoga. And one of those reasons was that there were men in the community who wanted to get involved. And I realized that I was making it like pretty exclusive by saying it was sober girls. And then the second thing was that people were leaving. So people would have a drink and then they would say, oh, I'm not sober. And then they would leave and then they would never come back. And then they would feel like they weren't welcome in the group. And the reality is that most people do not have a straight, clear-cut line where they're like, okay, I'm sober. It's done. This is day one. This is day two. Okay, whatever. You know, like that's not the typical path. And for me, it involved a really long period of time, like I told you, of me teetering on the edge and seeing these ads. And like, I couldn't even tell you how many months it was, but it was at least 4, maybe 6 months that I was looking at this community before I bought in and joined it. Right. And so for some people, they are going to jump right in and then they're going to teeter on the edge and do day one and then do a few days sober and then do one again. And for some people that is going to be a year, you know, for some people that's going to be a long period of time because it's a really big surrender and it's a really big shift and it's a lifestyle change. And so the movement to change our name to Sober Curious Yoga was to be inclusive of that, because we get people that are going to want to come that haven't even stopped drinking yet. They just want to hear people's stories about their life has changed, and they just want to sit with that for 8 weeks or 8 months or whatever it is. And so that was the reasoning why we called our program Sober Curious Yoga. It's because we want it to be inclusive to anyone at all stages in their journey. And I think that's one of the biggest, I myself never participated in 12-step. So I can't speak on what it's like. I'm actually doing a yoga for 12-step course right now though, which is really cool just to learn more about it. But I do know, and I have heard that in some recovery communities, there's a lot of shame around relapsing, and a lot of shame around that, when in reality, we're all humans and we're all going to make mistakes, and this is life, right? And we learn from our mistakes and we gather from our mistakes. And some people might not even think of it as a mistake because they're just sober curious. And so we just want to be inclusive to all of that. And so that was the reason why we've titled our program. And I think that you are definitely right in that this is the perfect thing for someone who is like me, in that college age, where it's just showing a curiosity about all the joy that sobriety can bring, and not labeling it as a drawback or a negative thing, or something to be ashamed about, because that was it. I had so much shame. And if it had been positioned to me as something cool, I probably would have jumped on the bandwagon a lot earlier. So that's really my goal.
Wonderful. Your business, a big part of it sure feels like community building, and really just sharing and helping others, same things that helped you find sobriety and maintain sobriety. Tell me more about your business, because there's a lot going on there.
There's so much. Yeah. So pretty much where it came out of was, I had obviously had an amazing experience in 1 year no beer, because that was the reason I got sober, and it was incredible. But what I was really lacking was a couple of things. One was live connection and live friendships, and two was a sense of spirituality. And I say that in the sense that, I really feel that all people in the sober world, we all have the same goal, which is for people to go alcohol free. So there's nothing, I'm not putting it down by saying it was lacking those things. I just think for every person, there is a different perfect program out there for them. And I couldn't find the one that was perfect for me. And so that was basically why I created it. And so the biggest offering we have a free Facebook group that people can join just to engage with what's going on, to get support, to get tips, mocktails, memes, it's all that kind of stuff. But our biggest thing is a 30-day Sober Curious Yoga Challenge. And what I'm saying to people all the time in that is that what's really big about it is these sober circles and these sober yoga classes. And we have a huge on-demand library. We have 3,000 on-demand yoga classes, but almost every hour of the day we're having a live session. And I always say to people, if you can, do as many live sessions as possible, because that's where you're going to make friends across the world who are going through the same thing. You'll hear people's stories and you'll be like, that resonates with me. I get that. And you'll start to just it's this empathy and this feeling of I'm not alone, and this person gets me. And it's just, that is the transformational part. And I actually heard this really interesting statistic, which I want to share, is a study was done recently that I came across on Instagram, that they said, okay, what would be more relaxing, stretching or restorative yoga? And surprisingly, the stretching group had lower levels of stress at the end of 8 weeks than the yogis. And what the researchers hypothesized is that stretching was a more social thing. So often you go into yoga and you just don't talk. Whereas in the stretching class, there was a lot of chatter happening. And so people were connecting. And I was like, wow, that shows the key point, which is we're sharing and we're talking and we're connecting. And that's the difference of just doing yoga on YouTube,
I've got so many ideas for prevention efforts, prevention programs, both in communities and on campuses now. I know my listeners are probably writing down all kinds of thoughts on let's partner with the student rec center that has fitness classes and yoga classes
Yeah.
and do a challenge. Housing, let's partner with the residence halls and put together some challenges in community. And yeah.
Oh my God. That would be the coolest thing ever. I would for me, as you're talking about it, I'm like, I would love to be involved in something like that, like helping campuses across the world come up with like a sober curious yoga challenge. And how amazing would that be to be like 18 and have that extreme experience of like a sober month doing yoga, and you'd be like, wait a second, this is awesome.
Right.
Yeah.
This is actually a lot better than I thought it was going to be.
Yeah, totally.
Yeah. Oh, awesome. So let's kind of bring this episode home, because I know it's getting late at night over there. 12 or 13-hour time difference. So first, again, thank you for burning that midnight oil to chat with me. I've got just a couple questions left for you if you're ready. So what words of hope or wisdom might you offer folks that might be sober curious?
It's a good question. My wisdom would be that it gets better. It gets better every day. And I think one of the hardest things that I see in people who are constantly redoing, 30 days sober, and then they start drinking again, and 30 days sober, and is that the first 10 days are the hardest 10 days. And so if you're doing that again, you're doing the hardest thing over and over again. And so my wisdom would be is that every single day gets better. And my biggest motivation for myself was that I never wanted to go back to that day one. And I was like, I can never do that withdrawal again. And so I would encourage you to really make it strong in your head of like, this is the clarity and contrast. This is the difference between hangovers. This is what I've brought to my life in sobriety, and keep circling back to that and just keep putting a foot in front of the other, knowing that every day is going to get better.
Beautiful, beautiful words of wisdom there. So much so, I'm going to scratch that next question I had in the queue for you. That is absolutely wonderful. So lastly, how can folks reach out to you? How can they connect with you, be a part of your community?
Yeah. So if you're an Instagrammer, you can find me at Alex McRobs, and I'm a big Instagram person, so that's where I'm most active. I also have a Facebook group called it's the Sober Curious Yoga free support group. So if you just search that Sober Curious Yoga, you'll find us. I highly recommend getting in there. And then you can check out everything at the mindfullifepractice.com.
All right. I will load these show notes up with links for you all. I'll tell you what, a lot of great wisdom you shared with us in this episode. I want to just replay it and pull out all of those little tidbits you shared. You didn't even realize it, but some brilliant stuff. And folks, we talked a little bit about happiness, and Alex shared that when she moved to Dubai, she thought she would be happy because she could drink, but actually found it was the opposite. When it comes to happiness, I'm sure you all have seen folks that just radiate joy, not just happiness that might be based on external circumstances, but that internal pure joy. I hope you could hear through your headphones, your speakers, that Alex is radiating that true joy from within. And I think a lot of that has to do with your big breakup in 2019, sober life. Well, this has been an absolute delight. Thank you very much. Listeners, check out those show notes and let's get connected. Thank you very much, Alex.
Thanks for having me.
That concludes this episode. Thanks for tuning in. Be sure to hit the subscribe button and share this episode with a friend before you leave. And we look forward to seeing you on social media, because prevention is better together. Together, we are stronger.